Welcome to Old Path Ministries and our study through the book of Judges. We get to chapter 12 today, and actually we're going to get into the beginning of the part of Judges that deals with Samson. And so, something to point out here before we actually get into the text. You've heard me say since we started this study through this passage, or through this book, that there's this repeating pattern that keeps happening, that from the times of Joshua, God would raise up these judges. The people would do well for a while. They'd fall back into a place of not walking after the Lord and getting into the idolatry of the nations around them. God would allow them to be overtaken by those nations until the point where they would finally cry out to God and He would deliver them. What we have now in chapter 12, before we even get to Samson, just think of the progression of this. They come out of the Exodus, and there's the murmuring and the complaining, and there is the disruption, the people that challenged Moses. Sometimes the people would complain because they didn't like the difficulties of their life, yet it's they who brought it upon themselves. They should have been into the land in a matter of weeks. Instead, 40 years goes by. But they get to the land of Israel, and Joshua ends up leading them in. We know that there was the first kind of failures of this was that they didn't go and lay hold of the land as they were supposed to by displacing all of the nations. And so we get here to Judges, and in Judges we find that God has to keep sending them a deliverer because of the oppressing nations around them. Now, remembering all of this, there shouldn't be oppressing nations around them. They should have all been displaced when they first came into the land. But look at, again, like I had said, the downward slide of this. Because now here we are in chapter 12, and we've already seen that there's the bickering that goes on by Ephraim towards people, and in this case, they're going to turn their attention back to Jephthah, and they're wanting to know how come they didn't have a chance for the plunder. We know that this was something that happened with Gideon. Same kind of a thing. There's just the kind of infighting that there is among the tribes. Now it turns out to full open warfare between groups of people of the children of Israel. So again, step back from the whole thing and just look over the course of hundreds of years, several hundred years of being in the land. They had fallen so far from what had been the foundation of the country that they're now warring against one another. And this is what it's come to. By the time we get to chapter 13, there's a change in this because now we've heard of the Philistines before, but we're going to find that they are going to be a consistent, constant trouble to the nation all the way up through David's time. And so you're going to find that the Philistines continually have a place in the history from this time of Samson all the way up into David's time. So with all of that being said, let's turn to chapter 12 and let's have a word of prayer. Father, we thank you as you gather us here today, that we can come to your word and that we can seek your instruction. And again, as we study through history in particular, we're able to take a look at that history and see how it might speak to our times in the way of application. Maybe we can see things about how you interact with your people, or better, that we can even look at times of either great success or great failure and make sure that those things that should be repeated, that we see the walk of faith and repeat them, or in those times of just terrible failure, that we would see the failure and avoid it. So Lord, we pray that you would open our eyes to your word and that you would instruct us through it. By your Spirit we ask in Jesus' name. Okay, so chapter 12 says this: Then the men of Ephraim gathered together, crossed over towards Zephon, and said to Jephthah, "Why did you cross over and fight against the people of Ammon, and did not call us to go with you? We will burn your house down with you, upon you with fire." So instantly it's, well, how come we didn't get a chance to be a part of it? If you remember back with Gideon, theirs was one of plunder. Hey, we want our share. And so now they're threatening directly Jephthah because they feel that he has deprived them. It's not because they wanted to assist him. It's not because they were coming to the defense of a brother. If that's what it was about, they would have rejoiced that he had won without their assistance, and it would have been great. Now they're threatening to kill him. So in verse 2, so Jephthah said to them, "My people and I were in a great struggle with the people of Ammon, and when I called to you, you did not deliver me out of their hands. So when I saw that you would not deliver me, I took my life in my hands, and I crossed over against the people of Ammon, and the Lord delivered them into my hand. Why then have you come up to me this day to fight against me?" Now, you'll notice again that God does not call them to this dispute, let alone call them to war. The one thing that you find in here where he's mentioned is that Jephthah says, I'll give credit to the Lord because he's the one who delivered him into my hands. Yet we know how messed up Jephthah was in this whole thing. He had his daughter sacrificed, all because he didn't understand the law of God and all of those things. So this is a time when God is wanting them to subdue the land, really a land that shouldn't have to be subdued any further. They're already in it, but they have not displaced the nations. And so you see again the downward spiral of this. Now there's open warfare among the tribes. So Jephthah gathered together all the men of Gilead, fought against Ephraim, and the men of Gilead defeated Ephraim because they said, you Gileadites are fugitives of Ephraim from among the Ephraimites and among the Manassites. Basically, they're brother tribes because they're both tribes that came from Joseph. So they're the sons of Joseph. So the people of Gilead had stayed in that area. They did somewhat break away from the tribes, but it wasn't as though they were in a place of open warfare. Again, remember, Jephthah is the person that the people of Gilead had gone and retrieved and said, help us out here. Okay. So, at this point, the Gileadites, they seized the fords of the Jordan before the Ephraimites arrived. And those are the passageways, so that people, the canyons and whatnot, so that people, if they're trying to get to a particular place, they have to pass through those. It's a good way of their commercial, their trade, their all the rest of it. But if you control them, you control the free flow of goods and people and everything else. And so they took these places. And then, when any Ephraimite would escape, who escaped would say, let me cross over. Then the men of Gilead would say to him, are you an Ephraimite? And if he said no, then they would say to him, say the word Shibboleth. And they would, and he would say Sibboleth without the SH. It would be SI, for they could not pronounce it correctly. So it's oddly enough, even among the children of Israel, by this time, even the language, or the I guess you could say the kind of accent or whatever is different even in that small of an area. And so, as it was, they didn't say it correctly. It was their way of just knowing this person who says he's not is. They could tell just by the way that the word was pronounced. But here's what happens. So they would take that person, they would kill him at the fords of Jordan, and there fell at that time 42,000 Ephraimites. Jephthah judged Israel for 6 years, and then Jephthah the Gileadite died and was buried among the cities in Gilead. Now after him, Isban of Bethlehem judged Israel. He had 30 sons, and he had given away 30 daughters to marriage, but he brought in 30 daughters from elsewhere for his sons, that he judged Israel, and he judged Israel for 7 years. So you'll notice that it goes from the closing out of Jephthah and the fact that 40+ thousand people died of a tribe. God had never called them to do this. So you have, killing within the very brethren of the children of Israel, which shows you again how far they had fallen down. We don't have much about a few of the judges that are mentioned, only how many kids they had, which again tells you it's just not a normal family kind of a dynamic when you have kids by the dozens. And then there's the implication here of the intermarriage that was taking place. So this Ibzan, he died and was buried at Bethlehem. After him, Elon, the Jebulonite, that's just from Zebulun, the tribe of Zebulun up in the north, he judged Israel, and he judged Israel for 10 years. And then Elon, the Zebulonite, died and was buried at Ajalon, in the country of Zebulun, and so the northern part of the nation of Israel. Now, after him, Abdon, the son of Hillel, the Pirathonite, he judged Israel, and this is again more in the northern parts of the country. He had 40 sons, 30 grandsons. They rode on 70 young donkeys, and he judged Israel for 80 years. And then Abdon, the son of Hillel, he died and was buried in the land of Ephraim, in the mountains of the Amalekites. So we get a little bit of who these judges are. We know nothing about them from history. That there are a few that we had heard mentioned earlier in the earlier part of the book. So not every one of the judges that we know by name do we really know them by exploit. We don't know how good they were, how bad they were. We know that they accumulated a lot of things to themselves. But really, we're not given that detail. And if it was necessary, if God felt it important, we would have been given it. Now, here is a place where there is, again, a real change in this. And we've noticed that kind of throughout, that even in the book of Judges, that there are these places where the history kind of takes a little bit of a turn and it changes a little bit. And here is where we have one of those. We're introduced to Samson. Now, what we do get, two things at the beginning of this. If you remember when God was raising up a brand new judge, it would usually be because a few things happened. That they started to find themselves oppressed. The children of Israel would cry out to God, and God would give to them a deliverer. We don't get any of the backstory. We don't understand anything about the families, just that God raises up this person because the children of Israel cried out. Okay. None of that is present here. What we have is a problem. The Philistines are now on the ascendancy, and they're along the coastline. Now, here's one of the things that is you may read about, that the Philistines are not a Semitic tribe. Meaning that they're not from the land. They're not the Canaanites that were thrown out. These would be considered as the uncircumcised. We're going to get that as we see a little bit further from Samson as he goes to try to take a wife from them. But there are those that speculate that they came from a distance away, all the way back to Egyptian days and the fighting that would take on there. And these were all the areas along the Mediterranean coast. Some would think that they may have come up from the area around Macedonia, maybe even on the west coast of Greece, and that they had come to the nation of Israel, what we know as Israel, and had settled there. But they were going to be really problematic for the children of Israel again until the times of David. So with that being said, we're introduced to who these guys are. Now, they're the ones who are causing the problem. So if you're looking at a map and you look up and down the east coast, or the west coast rather, of the nation, right there on the Mediterranean, just above Gaza, the city of Gaza and Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, those places like that, those are the cities of the Philistines. So if we think of pretty much the whole central coast down to the south along the Mediterranean, that's where they would be, and then they would have, of course, their places coming all the way inland. Now, this is what we hear about them, and this is really kind of where they come into the ascendancy of things. Now, there was a certain man from Zorah, the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had no children. So the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, "Indeed now, you are barren and you have borne no children, but you will conceive and you will bear a son. Now therefore, please be careful not to drink wine or similar drink, and not to eat anything unclean." So this was going to be for her in preparation for her son. Now, this goes back to, you're going to hear about it in a moment, it's going to be a Nazirite vow that's mentioned, but the idea of taking a vow, we can read about it, I'll give you the reference here in just a moment, but it's usually a person who decides that they want to take this vow, and then there's a whole bunch of information about it. In this case, this is the angel of the Lord saying, your son is going to have a Nazirite vow, but you're going to do it for him. So this gets the mother involved with it, and she's going to keep herself from these things, and then her son would be born into this tradition. So therefore, please be careful not to drink wine or similar drink, and not to eat anything unclean, for behold, you will conceive and bear a son. No razor will come upon his head, for the child will be a Nazirite, and he will begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. Now, just keeping your figure there, if you turn to the book of Numbers, chapter 6, from there is where you can get all of the detail. I probably just should have given you the citation. There's really no reason to read it, but you'll notice the one thing that you will see in here, it's given direction of what a Nazirite vow would be, and it's the person that says if they want to take this vow. So it is a conscious effort on the person who's doing it that they want to take this vow. They're going to vow something to the Lord, and during that time, they're going to take upon themselves some characteristics that wasn't natural to them. So, verse 2, speak to the children of Israel and say, when either a man or a woman consecrates an offering to take the vow of a Nazirite to separate himself to the Lord, he will separate himself from wine and similar drink. And so it tells you all the things that they're excluded from until such time as that vow is over, or if they defile themselves. And the way of defiling themselves clearly would be if they were going to take of those drinks and all the things that were forbidden to them, or if they come around or in contact with a dead body. And so, there's a lot that's going on here. We see that God has set in place what should be the case, that Samson would be vowed to the Lord by his parents, and then it would be for him to take that vow going forward. Of course, we see as a number of occasions with Samson, this is a man who is potentially so gifted by God with so many things. He does such dynamic things through him, yet it seems as though Samson never really fully takes over and takes in all that he could possibly have done. We find him to be kind of just a study in failure. So, as we read on verse 6, so the woman came and told her husband, saying, a man of God came to me, and his countenance was like the countenance of an angel of God, very awesome. But I did not ask him where he was from, and he did not tell me his name. And he said to me, behold, you will conceive, and you will bear a son. Now drink no wine or similar drink, nor eat anything unclean, for the child shall be a Nazirite to God from the womb to the day of his death. So it was going to be a lifelong thing if everybody carried out their part. The mother would do it. She seems to be one who does what she's supposed to. It's Samson who doesn't. The man is obviously very much sensual in a lot of different ways, and he's given an enormous amount of ability that we'll see here, and it comes upon him as the Lord gives him the ability. He had the ability to be so great, and yet he was so very human and never really fully dedicated. So this is kind of an interesting thing when you stop to think about it, because so often parents are really notorious for this. They want their kids to be so good in their walk with the Lord, it's almost as though they think that they can walk their kids' walk for them, and it always just winds up so bad, and the kids just don't follow. Well, this is certainly one of those cases. So this is really something that Samson's father, Manoah, is not really comfortable with, wants some more details. So Manoah prayed to the Lord and said, O my Lord, please let the man of God whom you sent come to us again and teach us what we shall do for this child who will be born. Now, he doesn't doubt that this barren woman will be given a child. That doesn't seem to be his issue. It's a pretty interesting thing that you're asking us to do. First of all, we can have children, but you're going to tell us we are, and yet I'm going to have him consecrated to you for the entirety of his life. But boy, they're looking for some details. So, there is something very commendable about this. It is not a problem when you really feel that God has given you something to do. Actually, I think it's commendable if you say, before I go and do anything that you've asked me, I want to make sure I have all the details. So he wants to know more about this. So God listened to the voice of Manoah, which I think is, again, cool commentary. I genuinely believe that it is not only a wise thing, I think God likes it when we get to the point of him saying, I want you to do this. Great, Lord, I want to do this for you, but I want to do it in a way that's pleasing to you. Would you please give me all necessary instruction that I might do it in a way that is exactly the way you want it to be? Very, very, I believe, commendable. Well, so God listened to the voice of Manoah, and the angel of the Lord came to the woman again as she was sitting in the field. But Manoah, her husband, was not with her. Then the woman ran in haste, told her husband, and said to him, Look, the man who came to me the other day has now appeared to me again. So Manoah arose, followed his wife, and when he came to the man, so they were able to catch up to him, says to him, Are you the man who spoke to this woman? Pointing, or obviously looking to his wife. And so he said, I am. So he's obviously this is the angel of the Lord. We realize in a moment he's no ordinary angel, if you will. And so the question becomes, my wife told me what you had said. I just want to know if you're him. And so, of course, this is that way of I don't want it to be mistaken identity. I want to be able to ask the question. So are you this person? Of course, he says yes. So he says, so Manoah arose, followed his wife, and when they came to the man, he asked him, are you the man who spoke to this woman? And he said, I am. Now, Manoah said, now let your words come to pass. What will be the boy's rule of life, and what will be his work? So the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, of all that I have said to the woman, let her be careful. So there are the things on his wife's side. She's supposed to keep from drink. She's supposed to keep from anything that would be a defilement to herself as she carries Samson. So she may eat nothing that comes from the vine, nor may she drink wine or similar drink, nor eat unclean things. And all that I have commanded her, let her then observe. So Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, please let us detain you, and we will prepare a young goat for you. So this sounds very similar to what happened with Gideon, if you remember that too. And so we really want to make sure that what we're doing is right. We want to make sure that you are who you are. For whatever reason, there is suspicion in this, at least to some extent. And so they want reassurance. We want to make sure that all of what we're seeing is correct. Let me make an offering here. Well, the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, though you detain me, I will not eat your food. Let's go to verse 15. Then Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, please let us detain you, and we will prepare a young goat. And so the angel of the Lord said, though you detain me, I will not eat your food. But if you offer a burnt offering, you must offer it to the Lord. For Manoah did not know that he was the angel of the Lord. So the angel of the Lord here, clearly no ordinary angel, no ordinary messenger, because we're about to see what's going to happen with him. He says, if you're going to bring an offering, bring it to no one other than to God himself. Now the reason why is because it's going to be evident when the whole thing is consumed with what happens with this angel of the Lord. This is done with the intention of making sure that Manoah knows who it is that's given this direction. Remember, it's an angel of the Lord. They're not sure exactly who and what he is. The angel says, if you're going to make an offering, it's a burnt offering, and you give it to the Lord. He's the one who receives this offering. Now, when Manoah hears this, it distances, if you will, the angel who's giving the instruction and says, don't look at me, look to the Lord, make your offering to him. Very important. So Manoah said to the angel, what is your name, that when your words come to pass, that we may honor you? And the angel of the Lord said to him, why do you ask my name, seeing that it is wonderful? There are a couple of ways that this can be translated, but it's basically it is indescribable, it's incomprehensible to you, which is another way of saying no ordinary person here. So there are those that would call this theophany, Christophany. This would a lot of people would just come right out and say that this has got to be Jesus because the offering was to the Lord, but it's going to be consumed up, and this angel will go up with it. And so you couldn't say my name is wonderful. It is incomprehensible. It's not just a name that you could repeat, which is, again, no one can ever tell you what for sure the name of God was. It has no vowels. They never were able to say it. In fact, even when people would say it, that when they say God, they leave out the O. They don't want to have his whole name because it's unknowable. It's indescribable. Verse 19, so Manoah took the young goat with the grain offering, offered it upon the rock of the Lord, and he did a wondrous thing while Manoah and his wife looked on. Now they've given the correct offerings here. Obviously they have enough of an operation of the law, a knowledge of the operation of the law, that they did everything as prescribed. And so it happened, as the flame went up toward heaven from the altar, that the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame of the altar. And when Manoah and his wife saw this, they fell on their faces to the ground. And when the angel of the Lord appeared no more to Manoah and to his wife, then Manoah knew that this was the angel of the Lord. And Manoah said to his wife, we will surely die. Now, why is that? Because we have seen God. Now, everything that took place was intended for him to recognize just who it was that he was dealing with, and he comes to that assumption. It's his wife who gives some reason here, though. His wife says to him, "If the Lord had desired to kill us, he would not have accepted the burnt offering and the grain offerings from our hands. Nor would he have shown us any of these things, nor would he have told us such things as these at this time." And so the woman bore a son, called his name Samson, and the child grew, and the Lord blessed him. So far so good. Mom does what she's supposed to. They raise up the child on the way that he's supposed to go. God blesses him, has his hand upon him, is a good way of putting that. And the Spirit of the Lord began to move upon him at Manaah in Dan, between Zorah and Eshtaol. So his life is spent early on, not given a whole bunch of detail about it, but God's hand is on him. He's raised the way that he's supposed to. But as it is so often, kids do what kids are going to do. Who knows how much he really fully grasped just who he is and what he's supposed to do. I'm sure his parents could have said, God showed up and told us in particular that you're going to be there. There are those who will embrace these amazing giftings. John the Baptist is a great example of that. Samuel is a great example of that. You have them in the history of Israel. This is one of those where every benefit was given to him, yet he did not follow those things. So chapter 14 is a great opening part. He's still going to go on with Samson for another couple of chapters. There's still more here about Samson, even past 14. So Samson went down to Timnah, and he saw a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. So here's where you just get the idea. He's impulsive. He doesn't really seem to care as much as he should for the things of God, though God's had his hand on him. He goes to a place where he's not supposed to be, for reasons he's not supposed to be there, to find a wife of a Philistine. And those two groups should never mingle. So there's just so much wrong with what's going on here. Remember, by this time, the nation is in a really bad situation. They're killing one another. They're at war with one another. They're not even crying out because of their wickedness that we have record of. Nonetheless, God raises someone up because, again, even though the nation is in a place of really bad corruption, there are still those who seem devout, and Samson's parents are among them because they do everything that God has said to them. They do everything even of themselves. They want to make an offering. They do it really, as we could see it, kind of by the book. But that doesn't mean that you can make your kids walk their walks. We would love if that was the case. Us parents, especially parents who may have had wayward kids, we may look back on those lives and wish that we could have done something different. But kids are going to have to answer for themselves. Well, this is definitely one of those kind of situations. So he went up and he told his mother, saying, I have seen, his father and mother said, I have seen a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore, get her for me as wife. Then his father and his mother said to him, Is there no woman among the daughters of your people, or among all my people, that you must go and get a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? That's just a way of saying they're outside of, even as rebellious as they are, think really from the times of Abraham, there are a lot of people in the land. There are those that they can get from within. Even those that are within the land are ones that were made to be circumcised if they're going to live among the Jews. The Philistines are out there all by themselves. They're not from the land. They've come to the land, and they're creating all kinds of troubles. These are the last people that he should involve himself with. Well, it says here, and so Samson said to his father, Get her for me, for she pleases me well. But his father and his mother did not know that it was of the Lord, that he was seeking an occasion for to move against the Philistines, for at that time the Philistines had dominion over Israel. Now, again, even the wording of this might give the impression that God wanted it to go down this way. Not at all, but God was going to use a very imperfect situation, and he was going to be the one who would, for the time, use Samson to deliver them to some extent. But we're also going to see it really it comes to his peril. This is a man who's easily manipulated, it seems, has a lot of blind spots, though he has this just inordinate amount of strength and ability and kind of just very much superhuman kind of abilities to him, as we'll see repeatedly. In verse 5, it says, So Samson went down to Timnah with his father and with his mother, and he came to the vineyards of Timnah. Now, to his surprise, a young lion came roaring out against them. They're just going down to where he had seen this woman wanted for wife, and they're attacked by a lion. And the Spirit of the Lord came mighty upon him. This you will find happens a number of times. He's endowed at the time, which means he doesn't have it all the time. It's just when he needs it, God gives him a supernatural ability and a supernatural strength. So a lion comes at him, and he tore the lion apart as one would have torn apart a young goat, though he had nothing in his hand, but he did not tell his father or his mother what he had done. So they're there with him, but they don't see the incident. He doesn't say anything about it. They're just all in the same general area. So then he went down, and he talked with a woman, and she pleased Samson well. And after some time, when he returned to get her, he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion. So they go, arrangements are met, he goes back home, he comes back after a time, and he sees what's left of the carcass, but bees have taken up residence, and they've formed a hive. It's gross when you think about it. So after a time he returns, and he turned aside to the carcass of the lion, and behold, a swarm of bees and honey were in the carcass of the lion. So here's the first of his breaking of his Nazirite vow. He'll keep the hair for a while, but he's not doing what he's supposed to do because he's now come in contact with a dead body. He would have to know by this time that a Nazirite vow was to keep him from doing this. Remember, it's a lifelong commitment. That was what his parents were told, and I'm sure that they had let him know this as well. We see throughout his history that he doesn't savor those things as he ought to. So what does he do? When he comes to his father and mother, he gives some to them. He takes the honey. I'm sorry, let me go back to verse 8. At some time he turned aside, saw the carcass of the lion, and behold, a swarm of bees and honey were in the carcass of the lion. And so he took some of it in his hands, and he went along eating it. And when he came to his father and to his mother, he gave some to them as well, and they also ate, but he did not tell them that he had taken the honey out of the carcass of the lion. Why did he not tell them? Well, clearly that would be a break of the vow. His parents would know that. He has to know it because he has a consciousness that can't tell mom and dad, they'll get upset with me because I'm breaking my vow. And here's the thing that people really need to recognize with this. We don't take vows anymore, but we want to make sure that let the things that we say when we give an assurance that we're going to do something, that we follow through with it. Because God doesn't forget such things, especially if we're going to say, God, I want to do this, and I need you to help me with it. I vow to do this or whatever, which just shows you how foolish taking vows is. And if we're going to do something and give our word, then we had better follow through with it. Well, we see here, so his father went down to the woman, and Samson gave a feast there for young men, as young men used to do. And it happened when they saw him that they brought him 30 companions to be with him. Then Samson said to them, let me pose a riddle to you, and if you can correctly solve and explain it to me within the 7 days of the feast, then I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothing. But if you cannot explain it to me, then you will give to me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. And they said to him, pose your riddle that we may hear of it. So they go, okay, great, we'll take it, let's hear it. Now, remember, also, if they have like a 7-day long feast, you would assume that he's probably partaking in all of those things, which again would be a violation of his oath as a Nazirite. Well, so he says this. Here's the riddle, guys. And so he said to them, out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. Now, for 3 days they could not explain the riddle. Now, basically, since this is something that would be really uncommon, and it's something that only he would have firsthand knowledge of, it really kind of sets the guys up. There's just no way. So he's expecting to get these lavish things of this fine linen and changes of clothes, means basically a wardrobe, a month-long wardrobe. So 30 pieces. And so he gives them a riddle that there's no way that they're going to possibly be able to solve. And now they start to concoct a way of doing it. And again, it's just the whole tale is just so sordid. But it's going to be like this really for the rest of of what we know of Samson. We all know the whole Samson and Delilah thing, and then he ends up dying in the process after the Philistines are able to get him because the vow is so broken that God does not use him and doesn't give him the might at the time. He gives it to him at the very end again. But again, it just shows what a mess we can make of things when we have every conceivable possible benefit, and yet for reasons of compromise and sensuality and desire, lust even, all these bad decisions happen, and they have such horrible collateral damage and problems. Well, in verse 15, now it came to pass on the 7th day that they said to Samson's wife, entice your husband that he may explain this riddle to us, or else we will burn you and your father's house with fire. You have invited us in order to take what is ours. Is that not so? So the accusation, you're just doing this. You've put him up to this whole thing. You've invited us here, and you've done it just so that we can help enrich you. Now, go find out what it is that what's the answer to his riddle, or else we're going to kill you and your household. Pretty heavy stuff. Just what a mess this whole thing is. So they accuse her. You did this to enrich yourself. You and Samson are in on it. Well, so Samson's wife wept on him and said, you only hate me. You do not love me. You have posed a riddle to the sons of my people, but you have not explained it to me. And he said to her, look, I have not explained it to my own father and mother. So should I explain it to you? They don't even know what it is. Why would I explain it to you? Now, when she had wept on him the 7 days while her feast lasted, and it happened on the 7th day that he told her. And why? Because she pressured him so much. Then he explained the riddle to the sons of, then she explained it to the sons of her people. So she hears it from Samson, she tells them so that they can give the answer. So the men of the city said on the 7th day before the sun went down, what is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion? So they give the answer. And so he answers them back. Now see, they're doing this in the poetic sense. Look at how he answers them back. If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle. So it's basically his way of saying, you broke my wife. You got her to tell you that because she's the only person that he would have told it to. So kind of interesting how he puts it back on them and says, you guys were devious about this. Now look, this again will show you just how things have really, I think you can say, slidden pretty much out of order. They've really become a mess. So the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, and he went down to Ashkelon, and he killed 30 of their men, took their apparel, and gave the changes of clothes to those who had explained the riddle. So his anger was aroused, and he went back up to his father's house. Now, so what he ends up doing, he has to give them something. So what he ends up doing is he goes down to one of their cities. Now it says that the Lord empowers him at this time, and for reasons that God only knows, for his purposes, he allows all of these things. A very carnal man who's doing some very carnal things, and he goes and he takes it by plunder, by going into one of their cities and taking out 30 of their guys and bringing out all of the things that belong to those 30 guys and giving it to the countrymen. So basically it's, okay, I'll pay you back, but with the stuff from your own countrymen. And they don't say a thing about it. Notice that there's nothing here in the record at this time that they oppose him. Look at what he's so disgusted with his wife. So Samson's wife was given to his companion who had been his best man from among her own people. It's like, I'm going back home. I'm not going to have anything to do with you. And he goes ahead and does this whole thing. Now, we know at the beginning that God was going to use this, and what exactly really fully comes of this is really kind of hard to say, but what it does is it now starts the skirmishes between God's people and the Philistines, and they will ultimately drive them completely out during David's time. But remember, by this time, the Philistines were already oppressing them, and so God raises up Samson and uses him. And again, there's so many questions in this. Why does he use such an incredibly flawed man? Was it the best that he had, or why? Again, we don't really get good answers to these things. We are only able to speculate. But this is certainly not a man who you would look at and say, what a champion, what a hero, what a devout man doing all of the right things. He just mixes so much of what should have been a really, as much as a human can be, it should have been a flawless thing. This is a man who was designated to this position before he was born, and his parents were in on the whole thing. And yet, this is a man who did what he did because of his own drive and his own passions. And we're going to see it's a life of so much missed opportunity, and he squanders so many things. Most of the rest of what we know about Samson is going to come up in the chapters that we'll be looking at here, the next couple of chapters anyway. And it's the stories that we do know about him leading to his ultimate demise. And so as we work through this book, we're at the opening part here, these couple of chapters of Samson. We have a couple more to go, but we'll be able to hear and see what he's about from kind of beginning to end. And then we'll have a better understanding by the time that we're done with it. What I want to do is take a pause here. I know it's a little bit shorter than we've been doing lately. We'll pick up chapters 15 and 16 because they work really well together. We'll just kind of leave them at that, or leave it at that, and we'll move on to that next week. We'll have it up. Actually, I'm a day late because I was out of town for a conference, but I'll have the next one up at its regular scheduled time on Monday. And so we'll pick it up there next week. May God bless you until we see you next week.